The dust hung thick in the air like a shroud, choking the light from the midday sun. It swirled round her bare ankles, gritty and unrelenting, as if the earth itself were trying to claim her. The wooden platform creaked under her weight, splintered boards biting into her thin soles. She stood there, arms bound loosely at her sides with a frayed rope that smelled of old sweat and hay. Her dress, once blue, now faded to the color of bruised sky, clinging damply to her skin. The town square was a blur of faces, strangers, all, their eyes sharp as cactus spines, murmuring like wind through dry grass. No one she knew, no one who cared. The heat pressed down, heavy and indifferent, drawing beads of sweat that traced slow paths down her neck. Mingling with the salt of unshed tears, her name was Eliza, though no one had spoken it in days. It echoed only in her mind now, a faint whisper against the auctioneer's hammer blows on the podium. She kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the plains stretched out flat and merciless, dotted with scrub brush that clawed at the sky. The world felt vast and empty, swallowing her whole. Her stomach twisted, hollow from hunger. But it was the ache in her chest that burned deepest, a raw, gaping wound from the betrayal that had led her here. Abandoned at the edge of this god-forsaken town, left by the man who'd promised a new life out west, only to vanish with their meager savings and her trust. The rope chafed her wrists, a reminder that she was no longer her own. The auctioneer's voice droned on, gravelly and detached, listing her like livestock. Strong back, quick hands, 23 years, no kin to speak of. Laughter rippled through the crowd, low and mocking, as bids trickled in low offers from grizzled miners and leering merchants, each one a nail in her dignity. She swallowed hard, tasting dust and bile, her breath coming shallow. The sun bore into her scalp, making her vision swim, but she wouldn't let her knees buckle. Not here, not in front of them. Inside, fragments of memory flickered like dying embers, the cool shade of her family's farm back east. Before the fever took her parents, before the debts piled high as the Rockies. She'd sold everything then: the silver locket, the quilt her mother stitched to chase a fool's dream westward. Now, that dream lay shattered at her feet, ground into the dirt. A bid rose, hesitant, from a man in a stained vest, his eyes roaming her form like she was a horse at market. $50, he grunted, and the auctioneer nodded, hammer poised. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs, a trapped bird, desperate for flight. The plains beyond called to her in their silence, promising nothing but endless wandering, starvation, under that pitiless sky. But running meant certain death buzzards picking at her bones, wind erasing her tracks. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of it all pressed down, the indifference of the land mirroring the hollow in her soul. Then, a voice cut through the murmur, sharp and unyielding. "I'll double that." It came from the back, where a tall figure stood shadowed against the glare, his hat pulled low, coat dusted with the red earth of distant ranches. The crowd shifted, whispers rising like startled crows. Eliza's eyes snapped open, searching, but the sun blinded her. The auctioneer paused, hammer frozen mid-air. As the stranger stepped forward, his boots thudding heavy on the packed dirt, he was broad-shouldered, face weathered like old leather, lines etched deep around eyes the color of storm clouds. Calasses marked his hands, fingers curled loose at his sides. No gun belt, but a quiet authority that silenced the bids. 100, he repeated, voice low, carrying over the square like a distant thunder. The auctioneer blinked, then grinned, slamming the hammer down. Sold to the rancher. Eliza's world tilted. The rope fell away as rough hands pushed her forward. Toward him, she stumbled down the steps, legs numb, the dust rising in puffs around her. He didn't touch her, just nodded toward a wagon hitched nearby, loaded with supply sacks of flour, coiled rope, a rifle leaning against the seat. "Get in," he said, not unkindly, but with the finality of a door closing. She hesitated, the crowd's stares burning her back, then climbed up, the wood warm under her palms. The wagon creaked as he swung up beside her, reins slapping lightly against the horse's flanks. They rolled out of town, the square fading behind, swallowed by the haze. The plains opened wide, wind whipping her hair, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. He didn't speak, eyes fixed ahead, but she felt his presence like a shadow, solid, unyielding. Inside, fear coiled tight, mingled with a fragile spark of something else. Not hope, not yet. Just the absence of immediate despair. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in bruised purples, memories surfaced unbidden back on the trail. Weeks ago, when Josiah had smiled at her across the campfire, promising land and a home. "We'll build it together," he'd said, his hand warm on hers. But the fever hit the wagon train hard, and when it spared her, it took him more, so she'd thought, until she found his note in the empty strongbox gone ahead. "Forgive me." The words had blurred with her tears, the abandonment cutting deeper than any blade. Asterisk, asterisk. The wagon jolted over the uneven ground, wheels groaning as they carved ruts through the brittle grass. The air grew cooler, sharp with the tang of sagebrush, and the faint musk of horse sweat. Eliza sat rigid, hands clenched in her lap, the faded fabric of her dress catching the last glints of sunlight. The rancher, whose name she still didn't know, kept his eyes on the horizon, guiding the horses with steady hands, his silence as vast as the plains around them. The sky bled crimson now, streaking the clouds like spilled wine, and the wind carried a low moan, as if the land itself were grieving. Her chest ached, not just from hunger but from the weight of being seen as property, sold for $100 to a stranger who might be savior or captor. She couldn't yet tell. The memory of Josiah's note clawed at her again, sharp as a spur. She'd found it at dawn, the wagon train's camp eerily quiet, the others still sleeping or dead. The strongbox sat open, its emptiness a betrayal louder than words. Gone ahead. Forgive me. She'd crumpled the paper, her sobs muffled by the sleeve of her dress, the morning cold biting her skin. He'd taken everything, their savings, her mother's silver ring, the dream of a little house with a porch facing west. She'd walked alone after that, days blending into nights, until the sheriff's men found her, half-starved, and dragged her to that auction block. The shame of it burned now, her wrists still raw from the rope, her pride ground down like the dust under the wagon's wheels. The rancher shifted beside her, pulling the reins to slow the horses as they approached a shallow creek. Water glinted like polished steel in the fading light, murmuring softly over smooth stones. He climbed down without a word, unhitched the horses, and let them drink, his movements deliberate, unhurried. Eliza watched him, searching for intent, in the set of his shoulders, the way his hands moved, sure but not cruel. He glanced at her, catching her stare, and for a moment, his eyes held hers, gray and unreadable, like a storm cloud too distant to predict. Eat, he said, tossing a small bundle onto the wagon seat beside her. It was a cloth-wrapped parcel, heavy with the scent of cornbread and dried meat. Her stomach growled, loud enough to shame her, but she hesitated, fingers trembling as she reached for it. The last time someone offered her food, it came with a price, a leering trader on the trail, his hands too eager, his voice thick with promises she'd refused. She'd run then, barefoot, into the night. Now she had nowhere left to run. The rancher turned away, tending the horses, giving her space. She unwrapped the cloth, finding a square of cornbread, still warm, and a strip of jerky, tough as leather. She tore into it, the salt and grease flooding her senses, her hunger a wild thing that drowned out caution. The food steadied her, grounding her in the moment, the creek's soft babble a counterpoint to her chewing. She glanced at him again, his back to her, checking a hoof with the care of a man who knew broken things. Why'd you do it? Her voice cracked, the first words she'd spoken in hours, raw from disuse. He didn't turn, just paused, one hand resting on the horse's flank. Didn't seem right, he said finally, voice low, like gravel shifting underfoot, them bidding on you like that. He straightened, brushing dirt from his hands, and looked at her not with pity, but something harder, like recognition. You looked like you'd fight the devil himself if you had to. She didn't know what to say to that. The cornbread sat heavy in her stomach, her throat tight with something she couldn't name. The creek reflected the first stars, tiny pricks of light in the growing dark, and she thought of her mother's locket, the one Josiah had taken, its etched star glinting in candlelight back home. She'd traced it with her fingers as a girl, dreaming of skies big enough to hold her future. Now, those skies felt like a cage. He climbed back into the wagon, the wood creaking under his weight. We'll camp here tonight, he said, not asking her opinion, but not dismissing her either. He pulled a blanket from under the seat and handed it to her, rough wool that smelled of smoke and cedar. She took it, her fingers brushing his, calloused and warm, and something stirred in her, a flicker of trust, fragile as a new flame. The night settled around them, the creek's song mingling with the rustle of grass. She wrapped the blanket tight, her body aching, her mind a tangle of fear and exhaustion. But for the first time in days, she wasn't alone. The stars above burned, steady, indifferent, yet their light felt like a promise she wasn't ready to believe. Asterisk, asterisk, the fire crackled low, flames licking at the dry wood he'd gathered from the creek's edge, sending sparks dancing into the night like restless spirits. The scent of smoke mingled with the damp earth, heavy and grounding, as Eliza huddled under the blanket, her back against the wagon wheel. The creek whispered on a constant murmur that softened the edges of her exhaustion. Stars wheeled overhead, vast and cold, pinning her to this strange new reality. The rancher sat across the fire, poking at the embers with a stick, his face half-shadowed, the lines around his mouth deepening in the flickering light. He hadn't pressed her for words, hadn't demanded anything beyond her presence, and that silence hung between them like a fragile truce. She traced the blanket's rough weave with her fingers, the wool prickling her skin, reminding her of the quilt back home, her mother's hand stitching late into the night, the needle flashing in lamplight. That quilt was gone now, sold for passage west, along with everything else. The memory pulled at her, sharp as a thorn, the auction of their farm after the fever. Neighbors picking over their belongings like vultures on a carcass. She'd stood there then, two arms wrapped tight around herself, watching strangers cart away pieces of her life. Josiah had appeared at the edge of the crowd, hat in hand, his smile warm as summer rain. "Come with me," he'd said. "We'll start fresh." She'd believed him, packed her few things, and left the graves behind. Now, that belief tasted like ash. The rancher cleared his throat, breaking the quiet. "Name's Harlan," he said, not looking up from the fire. "Harlan Cole." His voice was rough, worn by wind and solitude, but there was no edge to it, no malice. She nodded, though he couldn't see her own name sticking in her throat like dry bread. Finally, she whispered, "Eliza. Eliza Thorne," saying it felt like reclaiming something small, a scrap of herself amid the wreckage. He glanced at her then, firelight catching the gray in his stubble, making him look older, wearier. "Thorne," he repeated, as if testing the weight of it. "From back east." She hesitated, the question stirring the past like dust in a windstorm. "Illinois," she said softly. "Farm country." The words evoked the green fields, the smell of turned soil after rain, but also the sickness the way it crept in silent, claiming her father first, then her mother, leaving her alone with debts and echoes. Harlan nodded, tossing another stick into the flames. "Lost my spread to drought 2 years back. Started over here, further out." He didn't elaborate, but she heard the undercurrent, the loss etched in his tone, like a river carving stone. The fire popped, sending a shower of embers upward, and she watched them fade into the dark. Something in his story mirrored her own, a shared scar of abandonment by the land, by fate. But trust came slow, a trickle rather than a flood. She pulled the blanket tighter, the night chill seeping through, her body still aching from the days on foot as the fire died to coals. He stood, stretching with a grunt, and fetched a bedroll from the wagon. He spread it near the horses, giving her the fire's warmth, the wagon's shelter. "Get some rest," he said, turning away. She lay down, the ground hard beneath her, but the blanket softened it some. Sleep came in fits, haunted by dreams, Joseph's face blurring into the auctioneers, the hammer falling like thunder, the crowd's laughter chasing her across endless plains. She woke before dawn, heart pounding, the creek's song now a distant hum. Harlan was already up, coffee brewing over rekindled flames, the scent rich and bitter, pulling her from the haze. He handed her a tin cup, steam curling like ghosts in the gray light. Their fingers brushed again, and this time, she didn't flinch. The coffee burned her tongue, but it warmed her from within, chasing the night's shadows. "We'll reach the ranch by noon," he said, sipping his own. "It's not much, few cattle, a cabin, but it's mine." She nodded, the words sinking in, the possibility of a place, however temporary, easing the knot in her chest. Yet doubt lingered, a whisper in the wind. What did he want? Kindness rarely came free in this world. They broke camp as the sun crested the horizon, gilding the grass in gold. The wagon rolled on, wheels crunching over stones, the plains unfolding like a rumpled blanket. Birds wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and free, mocking her bound circumstances. Harlan pointed out landmarks, a twisted juniper scarred by lightning, a distant butte rising like a sentinel. His voice was steady, stories sparse but vivid, a winter storm that buried his herd, a Paiute trader who'd taught him to read the sky. She listened, her guard cracking inch by inch, the rhythm of the journey lulling her weariness by mid-morning. The ranch appeared a low cabin of weathered logs, corral fencing sagging under the weight of time, a barn leaning slightly, as if wary from standing alone. Smoke rose thin from the chimney, though no one tended it. Harlan pulled the wagon to a stop, dust settling around them like a sigh. He climbed down, offering a hand she took hesitantly, his grip firm but gentle. The ground felt solid here, less hostile, the air scented with pine from a nearby stand of trees. Inside, the cabin was sparse, a rough table, 2 chairs, a stove blackened by use, a quilt hung on the wall faded reds and blues, stitched with care. It caught her eye, pulling a memory, her mother's hands again, the needle's rhythm a lullaby. Harlan noticed her gaze. "My wife's," he said quietly. "Gone 5 years now, fever." The word hung heavy, a bridge between their losses. Eliza's throat tightened, the shared grief a thread connecting them. Fragile but real, she helped unload the supplies, her movements tentative, the work a distraction from the swirl within. As the sun climbed higher, beating down like a familiar curse, she felt the shift a slow thawing, the weight of abandonment easing in the quiet routine. But the crossroads loomed. Resist this vulnerability, or risk the hope budding like spring grass after rain. Asterisk, asterisk, the afternoon sun slanted through the pines, casting long shadows across the yard like fingers reaching for something lost. Eliza stood at the cabin's threshold, the doorframe rough under her palm, splintered from years of wind and neglect. Inside, the air held the faint scent of wood smoke and lye soap, a cleanliness that felt foreign after weeks on the trail. Harlan moved about the space with the ease of habit, stacking the supplies on a shelf, flour sacks thudding softly, tins clinking like muted bells. She watched him, her body still humming from the wagon's jostle, the quilt on the wall drawing her eye again, its patterns swirled in faded threads, a patchwork of memories she could almost touch. He caught her looking. "Sarah made it," he said, voice steady but edged with something raw, before the boy came and went. The words hung there, simple and heavy, like stones dropped into still water. Eliza's breath caught, the echo of her own losses rippling through. Her parents claimed by fever Josiah's vanishing act, leaving her adrift. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and stepped outside, the grass crunching under her boots, dry and brittle as old bones. The corral held a few head of cattle, their hides dusty red, lowing softly as they nosed at sparse feed. Harlan followed her out, wiping his hands on his trousers. "They need tending," he said, "if you're willing." It wasn't a command, more an invitation, and she seized it, grateful for the distraction. She fetched a bucket from the barn, the handle cool and worn, and drew water from the well, the rope creaking in protest. The cattle drank greedily, their warm breath misting her hands, and for a moment the work anchored her, pushing back the tide of uncertainty. As evening fell, the sky deepened to indigo, stars pricking through like needle points. They ate supper at the table, beans simmered with salt pork, cornbread crumbling warm in her fingers. The flavors grounded her, the silence between bites not uncomfortable but charged, like the air before a storm. Harlan spoke little, but when he did, it was of the land, the way the rains came late now, washing gullies into the earth, the wolves that prowled the edges, eyes glowing in the dark. She listened, her own stories bubbling up unbidden, the farm's fertile soil turning fallow after the fever, the way she'd buried her parents under an oak, the dirt caking her nails. For days after, she washed the dishes in a basin, the water turning murky, her reflection fragmented on the surface. Harlan sat by the stove, mending a harness, his needle flashing in the lamplight. The rhythm mirrored her mother's quilting, and the similarity tugged at her, loosening words she hadn't meant to share. "He left me," she said softly, hands still in the water. "Josiah took what we had and ran." The admission hung there, vulnerable and sharp, the first crack in her armor. Harlan paused, needle mid-stitch. "Men do that," he replied, not looking up. "Land does too, takes what it wants." But his tone held no judgment, only the weight of experience. He set the harness aside, lamplight etching shadows on his face. "Sarah and the boy, ... Fever came quick. I was out with the herd. Came back to graves I'd have to dig myself." His voice cracked faintly, like dry earth splitting, and Eliza felt the shared ache bridge the space between them, a quiet understanding, born of loss. She dried her hands on her dress, the fabric still stiff with trail dust, and sat across from him. The stove's heat warmed her skin, chasing the chill that had settled deep. For the first time, she saw him not as rescuer or threat, but as a man, hollowed by the frontier's cruelties, much like herself. The crossroads sharpened in her mind, clinging to the walls she'd built, the distrust that had kept her alive, or let this fragile connection take root, risking the pain of another abandonment. Days blurred into a routine, the ranch's demands pulling her from the edge of despair. She rose with the dawn, the sky paling to rose, milking the cow in the barn's dim light, the animal's flank warm against her cheek. Harlan taught her to mend fence, his hands guiding hers on the wire, calluses brushing in silent instruction. The work blistered her palms, but it healed something inside, the physical ache drowning the emotional void. Memories of Josiah faded slightly, his smile less vivid against the ranch's stark beauty, the pines whispering in the wind, the distant mountains etched purple at dusk. Yet tension simmered. One evening, as thunder rumbled far off, promising rain, a rider appeared on the horizon, dust trailing like smoke. Harlan stiffened, hand drifting to the rifle by the door. The man reined in, hat brim low, eyes scanning Eliza with a familiarity that chilled her. "Heard you bought yourself a woman at auction," he drawled, voice oily as axle grease. "Josiah's kin here. Says she owes a debt." Eliza's heart seized, the name a blade twist. Harlan stepped forward, body taut. "No debt here," he said flatly. "She's free to stay or go." The rider laughed, low and mocking, but Harlan's gaze held steady, unyielding. The man wheeled his horse, spitting into the dirt, and rode off, swallowed by the gathering dark. That night, storm clouds boiled overhead, wind howling through the pines like a lament. Eliza sat by the window, rain lashing the panes, her choice, crystallizing in the flashes of lightning. Resist, and flee into the unknown, or stay, and risk the warmth budding in her chest the way Harlan's presence filled the cabin's emptiness, his quiet strength a balm to her scars. She turned to him, firelight flickering on his face. "Why me?" she asked, voice barely above the rain's roar. He met her eyes, gray depths softening. "Because I saw myself in you alone, fighting." The words settled over her like the storm's first drops, soaking through her defenses. As the rain eased to a drizzle, she made her choice not with words, but a small gesture, her hand reaching for his across the table, fingers intertwining, rough skin against rough, a tentative bridge over the abyss. ****. The rain lingered into the next day. A soft patter on the cabin roof, turning the yard to mud that sucked at her boots like reluctant hands. Eliza moved through the chores with a new awareness, her fingers still tingling from the night before, the warmth of Harlan's grip, rough yet yielding, a silent pact forged in the storm's aftermath. The pines dripped steadily, their needles glistening like tears unshed, and the air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth and pine sap. She fed the chickens in the coop, their feathers ruffled against the damp, clucking softly as grain scattered from her palm. The routine felt different now, less a shield against loneliness and more a shared rhythm, but doubt whispered at the edges, sharp as the wind through cracks in the walls. Harlan worked the corral, repairing a loose rail, his hammer strikes echoing, steady and sure. She watched him from the doorway, the quilt's colors muted in the gray light, a reminder of Sarah's ghost lingering in the fabric. The choice she'd made to risk hope settled uneasily in her chest, a stone smoothed by river, current but still heavy. What if this warmth was fleeting, like Josiah's promises? The rider's visit gnawed at her, his words a poisoned seed, owes a debt. She wondered if Josiah had sent him, or if it was just the frontier's way of testing fragile bonds. Her hands clenched, the broom handle, sweeping mud from the porch, each stroke pushing back the fear dot, as midday broke through the clouds. Sun piercing like a hesitant blade, Harlan called her over. "Ride with me," he said, saddling to horses that bay for her, its coat sleek and warm under her touch. She mounted awkwardly, dress hiked up, the leather creaking as she settled. They rode out along the fence line, the ground squelching beneath, hooves, the plains unfolding in patches of green where rain had revived the grass. Wind tugged at her hair, carrying the faint tang of wildflowers blooming defiant in the mud. Harlan pointed to a distant ridge, voice low over the clip-clop rhythm. "Coyotes den there. Lost calves last spring." His words were sparse, but she heard the undercurrent, the land's betrayals mirroring his own. They paused at a creek swollen from the storm, water rushing over stones with an urgent murmur. Dismounting, she knelt to drink, the cold shocking her lips while Harlan skipped a flat rock across the surface, ripples distorting their reflections. "You could have run last night," he said suddenly, not looking at her. After that rider, the statement hung there, a question wrapped in fact. She straightened, water dripping from her chin, the creek's chill seeping into her bones. "Thought about it," she admitted, voice steady despite the tremor inside. "But running's all I've done. From the farm, from the graves, from him." The words tasted of truth, bitter and cleansing. He nodded, skipping another stone, this one sinking quick. "I bought you 'cause I couldn't watch it happen. Not again." His eyes met hers then, gray softened by the light, revealing cracks she'd glimpsed before the loss of Sarah, the boy, the isolation that had hollowed him. "But staying... that's yours to choose every day." The vulnerability in his tone mirrored her own, a mutual bearing of scars under the open sky. She felt the crossroads again, not as a single path but a daily fork, resist the pull of connection. Armored against hurt, or lean into it, risking the ache of loss anew. The creek babbled on, indifferent, its waters carving slow changes in the earth. They rode back as the sun climbed higher, drying the mud to cracks, the air warming with the promise of clearer days. In the barn, unsaddling the horses, their hands brushed in the dim light hay dust motes, dancing like fireflies, the scent of leather and sweat mingling. She didn't pull away, letting the contact linger, a small affirmation. Supper that evening was quiet, stew bubbling on the stove, steam curling lazy in the lamplight. They ate side by side, elbows nearly touching, the silence companionable now, laced with unspoken understanding. Afterward, she mended a tear in his shirt, needle pricking her finger once, a bead of blood blooming like a rose on the fabric. Night fell gentle, stars emerging clear after the rain, pinning the sky like scattered nails. Lying in the loft he'd rigged for her a pallet of blankets smelling of fresh hay. She listened to his breathing below, steady as the creek's flow. Memories surfaced softer now, her mother's quilt, not as a loss but a legacy of resilience. Josiah's betrayal, a lesson in discernment rather than defeat. The choice to hope felt less a leap and more a step, grounded in the ranch's soil, in Harlan's quiet presence. Yet as sleep claimed her, the wind rose again, rattling the shutters like a warning, the frontier's harsh poetry reminding her that transformation came slow, earned through storms weathered together. Days passed, like pages turning in a wind-worn book. The ranch's rhythms weaving into Eliza's bones, the creak of the cabin door at dawn, the low of cattle echoing across the plains, the scent of coffee boiling over embers. The sun rose gentler now, its light filtering through pines in golden shafts, warming the earth without the curse of that auction day. She moved through the work with a quiet purpose, her hands steadier on the reins. The hoe, the needle, blisters had hardened to calluses, mirroring the slow toughening of her spirit. Harlan's presence was a constant, not oppressive but anchoring, his few words carrying the weight of shared silences. One morning, mist hung low over the grass, veiling the distant butte in soft gray, as if the land were dreaming. Eliza stepped, bowed to the well, bucket clanging softly against the stone rim, water rising cold and clear. Her reflection stared back, less hollow-eyed, the bruises of betrayal fading like old ink. Harlan joined her, sleeves rolled to his elbows, veins mapping, his forearms like rivers on a worn map. They worked side by side, watering the garden patch she'd insisted Anna few rows of beans and corn, seeds scavenged from his stores, her fingers pressed into the damp soil, cool and yielding, life stirring beneath the surface. It reminded her of the farm back east, but without the favor's shadow. Here, the planting felt like a quiet defiance against loss. As the mist burned off, revealing the sky's vast blue, a letter arrived delivered by a passing trader. The envelope stained and creased. Harlan handed it to her without question, his eyes steady. She recognized the hand, Josiah's scrawl, jagged as barbed wire. Her pulse quickened, the past rushing back like floodwater, the note in the strongbox, his vanishing silhouette against the horizon. She tore it open under the pines, needles crunching underfoot, the wind whispering through branches like hushed secrets. "I'm sorry," it read, words blurring in her vision. "Fever took me too, but I lived. Spent it all on doctors. Come find me. In Denver. No plea, no promise, just facts, cold as creek stones." She crumpled the paper, letting it fall to the dirt, her chest tight with the crossroads final pull. Resist the old pull, the risk of chasing ghosts, or cling to this new ground. Rooted in Harlan's quiet redemption, she found him in the barn carrying the bay horse, brushstrokes rhythmic and soothing. The air smelled of hay and leather, dusk moat swirling in slanted light. "It's from him," she said, voice even, handing over the letter. Harlan read it slowly, face unchanging, then folded it neat. "You going?" he asked, not looking up, but his hand paused on the horse's flank. The question hung there, heavy as the quilt on the wall. She thought of the auction block, the dust choking her, strangers' eyes stripping her bare. Then this, the rancher's stock, poetry, Harlan's bid doubling not just the price but her worth in his eyes. Abandonment had shaped her, but so had this unlikely grace, his shout cutting through the crowd. The wagon's roll into possibility, the handclasp in the storm. Redemption wasn't grand. It was in the small gestures, the shared coffee, the mended fence, the space he gave for her to choose. "No," she whispered, then stronger. "No. This is home now." The words settled over them like the mist lifting, revealing clarity. Harlan nodded, a faint curve to his lips, the first she'd seen like dawn breaking after long night. He set the brush aside, stepping closer, his hand finding hers again, fingers interlacing with the ease of habit. No words needed. The touch spoke of acceptance, of scars knit together in the frontier's harsh weave dot. As evening fell, they sat on the porch, the sun dipping low, painting the plains in hues of amber and rose. The wind stirred gentle, carrying the scent of pine, and distant rain, dust settling soft rather than choking. Buzzards no longer circled overhead. Instead, a hawk soared high, wings spread wide against the fading light. Eliza leaned against the rail, Harlan beside her, their shoulders brushing a quiet transformation from oxen stranger to chosen kin. That the world stretched out, vast and indifferent as ever, but in this moment, it held a poetic warmth. The sun's last rays beat down not as a curse, but a benediction, gilding the land in quiet power.